whole lot of time, but I wanted to make a quick video on the importance of feathering the bass drum, 4-on-4 bass drum playing in a bebop setting or a jazz drumming context, whether it's big band, bebop, modal jazz, modern jazz, whatever the case is. This kind of playing is exemplified from Art Blakey, Charlie Persip, Max Roach, Elvin Jones even, which is something people don't think about too often, Kenny Washington, Kenny Clark, Joe Farnsworth, Art Taylor, renaming names, but the concept is called 4-on-4 bass drum playing or feathering the bass drum. What that means is when you listen to jazz, a lot of times you'll hear the bass player playing something called a walking bass line or a walking line, where they're basically playing every quarter note every 4 beats. They're playing a quarter note on every beat. You can hear that in most bebop tunes, a lot of jazz music. That's really the pulse of the music that really gives it that motion. And so what the drummers started doing back in the swing era before amplification is they started playing these 4-on-4 notes. They would play those quarter notes in unison with the bass player so that the rhythmic propulsion, if that's a word, the music being propelled through that beat, through that phrase, through that feeling. With the invention of amplifiers and basses being amplified, drummers started to pull back on playing the bass drum loudly, and they started playing something called feathering the bass drum, where they would still ghost those notes, still play those notes, but they weren't heard. And that's where you get the phrase, often felt but not heard. So if you're getting into jazz drummer, that's a big thing that a lot of guys do not practice, that 4-on-4 bass drum. The big key to that is to hit the bass drum very lightly, or strike the bass drum very lightly, and not to bury the beater. So you want, instead of the beater getting stuck in the drum, let's say with my stick, like, you want the beater to come off the drum, like that, like a rebound stroke, okay? So, basically, feathering the bass drum, you can practice it by just sitting there and playing quarter notes on the bass drum. And you just play those quarter notes at a volume much like this, where you can feel it and you can hear it, but it's not loud, it's not all, it's not, out of sync. It's just very even strokes, light strokes on the bass drum. The beater's coming off the bass drum, right? And now, where that comes into play is when you're playing the ride cymbal beat with the hi-hat and the snare drum phrasing along with it, right? And you really do play this at all tempos. Great drummers, Kenny Washington, Art Taylor, they're all feathering at every tempo they play, most tempos they play, unless they choose to accent on the bass drum, snare drum, cymbal, whatever, but they're choosing. It's a conscious decision, right? And the basic, the way you want to practice it, and the basic sound is just this. Sounds simple, but it's really not. And you want to be able to play it with the snare drum getting in there and some bombs on the bass drum, accent notes on the bass drum. So, and at all different tempos, right? And what's the hardest is really just playing it slow. Right, so that's a good way to pass it, or you just pass it by itself. Okay, so that's feathering the bass drum in a nutshell. I would say practice this. I think it's a lost art, but I think it really will change your playing. It will make your playing feel more grounded, more authentic. And really all the great jazz drummers did this, practiced this. Like I said, Max Roach, Kenny Clark, Art Taylor, Charlie Persip, Elvin Jones, right? Who we also think is always playing these triplet feeling rhythms and phrases, but he also is feathering the bass drum. Tony Williams, Sid Catlett, to all the modern drummers, Joe Farnsworth, Kenny Washington, you know, all the great jazz drummers. So I would think it's, you know, just something that someone brought to my attention about fredding the bass drum. You know, I think it's super important, and I just kind of wanted to express that real quick. All right, so practice fredding the bass drum, and thanks for checking it out.